The following episode features a historic article from the Nebraska History Magazine. This article may reflect the language and attitudes of its time, and while it offers valuable insight into the past, may contain expressions or viewpoints that are outdated or offensive by today's standards. Any outdated terms do not reflect the current views or perspectives of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Welcome to the Nebraska History Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Goforth. Each episode, we explore articles written and published in Nebraska History Magazine. In 1872, Wild Bill Hickok, Buffalo Bill Cody, and others attempted to organize a grand buffalo hunt. The event came with various challenges and ultimately was deemed a failure. Today we look back at that story and the correspondence between the men organizing the event through the 2005 Nebraska History Magazine article, Wild Bill Hickok, Buffalo Bill Cody, and the Grand Buffalo Hunt at Niagara Falls, written by Joseph G. Rosa. In 1873 and 74, James Butler Wild Bill Hickok appeared briefly as himself in William F. Cody's Wild West show, Buffalo Bill's Combination. It is often regarded as his earliest public performance, but in fact, it was not his first appearance before a live audience. A year earlier, in 1872, he had acted as master of ceremonies for a grand buffalo hunt on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. Hickok's involvement in the event was not generally publicized until 1882, when J.W. Buell wrote that Wild Bill had hit upon a novel idea that would make him a fortune, taking buffalo to Niagara to entertain the tourists. Accompanied by a number of Comanche Indians, the buffalo were to be shipped via Omaha through to Niagara Falls. But Buell's account of the chaotic outcome suggests that he relied more upon hearsay and a fertile imagination than fact. The Niagara Falls hunt was not a novel idea. In 1843, Phineas T. Barnum had purchased 15 half-starved and weary year-old buffalo calves and the services of one C.D. French, a noted rider and lasso expert, and exhibited them at Hoboken, New Jersey, describing the event as a grand buffalo hunt. An esteemed 24,000 people were attracted to the show, but there was panic when the buffalo escaped. A number of people were injured and one died. In 1860, Barnum, in partnership with James Capone Grizzly Adams, produced a similar venture that met with a limited success. In 1868, Joseph G. McCoy, the father of the Texas cattle trade, organized a grand excursion to the far west, a wild and exciting chase after buffalo on his native plains, in an effort to persuade Texas cattlemen to drive their herds to Abilene, Kansas. McCoy supplied the horses and equipment, but each man was expected to provide his own firearms. A year later, in 1869, Sidney Barnett, the son of Thomas Barnett, began planning a hunt similar to Barnum's, the event that eventually included Hickok. The Barnetts owned a museum on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls devoted to exhibits and relics obtained worldwide. Opened in 1827, the museum was popular with tourists, and to attract custom, the Barnetts kept their admission prices low and admitted schoolchildren free. Sidney Barnett, sometimes called Colonel because of a connection with the local militia, believed that an event featuring live buffalo would be a major attraction at the falls, although it seems doubtful that he knew much about the problems associated with the capture and control of them. And his attention was drawn to North Platte, Nebraska. A cache of letters to Barnett on the subject, some written by Buffalo Bill Cody and Texas Jack Omohundro, helps explain how Hickok became involved. Early in 1869, Barnett received the following from Cody. Dear Sir, I have just met Mr. Omohundro and am now on my way to Spotted Tail's Indian village with horses and rations for his people. Will return as soon as I deliver them to him. Mr. Omohundro and myself will catch you, the buffalo, and put them in the cars in good condition for you at this place or some other station close if you will pay enough for the trouble. It is a big job, but it can be done. Money will do anything. He will write you and will get them for you, and he will come on with them if he is well paid. I am in government employ and cannot leave. Let him know immediately. It will take a wagon for each buffalo to haul him to the road, and we have to send a good ways for more good ropes. You make the arrangements with him. You will have to forward money. It will look more like business if we, of course, are both strangers. The same as when Professor Ward and I commenced business, but I think we can do it on the square. If anything should happen that we could not get the buffalo, although if we commence to do the thing, it will be done. But should such a thing happen as we could not get them, I assure you the money will be returned if sent to our order. Yours respectfully, Buffalo Bill Cody. The outcome of that correspondence is uncertain, but Barnett continued his efforts to secure the animals. More than 50 years later, William F. Doc Carver, the self-styled evil spirit of the plains, claimed that he actually captured the buffaloes and that Hickok was among his helpers. Doc claimed to have signed a contract with someone not identified, quote, to deliver 100 live buffalo to the railroad yard in Kansas City. They were to be shipped to Niagara Falls, New York, for a great exhibition and buffalo hunt to be held there the following year. End quote. Besides Hickok, Doc said he had hired Hank and Monty Clifford, old John Nelson, and others, among them some, quote, Ogallala Sioux braves who were visiting their white kinsman, Nelson, end quote. Unfortunately, Carver added no further information. Early in 1872, Barnett approached the railroad for advice and received the following response. Dear Sir, yours of the 24th February. At hand, I think the enterprise you propose not only hazardous but very expensive. There are plenty of buffaloes in this section, say from 30 to 40 miles from this town. I have mentioned to the commander of the post here the matter of capturing full-grown buffalo bulls. He is a skilled buffalo hunter, but he thinks it next to impossible to capture them alive. However, I'll give you his figures. He agrees to corral them here for $1,000 per head. Transportation would cost you near $300 the carload. The Indians would not be allowed to go unless it was by an order from Washington. The Indian tents or teepees would cost from $75 to $100 the tent. We'll take pleasure in giving information or rendering you any assistance in my power in carrying out proposed buffalo hunt. Respectfully, Joe Bell. On March 13th, Barnett wrote to the post commander at the North Platte Station. The post was garrisoned by Company K of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry under the command of Captain James Egan, who held that position from November 1871 until April of 1872. Although he was probably experienced in the ways of the buffalo, he may well have decided to pass Barnett's inquiry on to Major Frank North, whose Pawnee Battalion of Scouts was famous on the frontier. North was, at that time, on detachment at Fort D.A. Russell in Wyoming Territory, which led to a delay in his response. In the meantime, exactly 3 years to the day since Barnett received Buffalo Bill's letter on March 29, 1869, Texas Jack wrote to Barnett, Dear Sir, I've received your dispatch several days ago. Should have given you an answer but did not know positively what to say as my partner, W.F. Cody, was not here. He returned yesterday just as I read your letter, and we had a talk together and decided we could capture those buffalo and deliver them here or some station near for the sum of $500 per head, and that you would take whatever number we get from 2 to 6 head. All we ask is that you deposit $1,000 in the First National Bank, Omaha, subject to our order. This might not be necessary, only that we need aid from parties that would not work unless on a certainty. You can have what reference you wish in regard to your deposit. We will expect the balance of the pay as soon as the buffaloes are safely delivered on board the train. If you accept this offer, which I think is as well as you can do, let us know at once by telegraph, and we will proceed to business. You can prepare your part, give out your advertisements, and make all other necessary arrangements. The buffalo will be between the 1st and 15th. I would much have preferred your offer as a partner in this project, as I am sure it will be a perfect success only for the objection of certain parties, which I could not possibly perform the capture without. I would expect your offer, however, as you have given me some inducements, as I made up my mind to come through with the buffaloes to take care of them over the road and to play any part in the hunt that you may wish me after we are once together. Perhaps I will join you in the exhibition that you spoke of. I will send you a sketch of my life in a few days that you may use in your publications if necessary. We have written to the Indian reservation to know if we can get the Indians required. We'll let you know as soon as we get an answer. I have a good rig here of bows and arrows that I have captured from the Indians, also nice lassos that I will bring along, as I can play Indian or white man as you may wish. I have always intended to go into something of this kind, but have never had the capital to commence with. You know it requires money to do anything out here. I was speaking to my old friend Professor Ward about it last winter, and he recommends the idea. I am sure that you and whatever parties you may have with you will make big money out of what you have undertaking. What business we transact from this point on must be through telegraph, as our time will be limited. You may feel perfectly safe in regards to our success, and make your arrangements accordingly, as we seldom undertake a thing that we do not carry out. No more at present. From your most, J.B. Omohundro, Texas Jack. There appears to also be a postscript to his letter following the signature, but it is very faint and unreadable. A week later, Barnett received a significant reply to his letter, written in early March to Major North. Dear Sir, yours of 13th March is received, and I hasten an answer. I am sorry to say that the chances for getting the buffalo you require are very slim, as there are no buffalo now near the Union Pacific Railroad, they all having gone south. I think your chances would be better on the Kansas Pacific. I would refer you to Bill Hickok, or better known as Wild Bill, Sheriff of, direct to Abilene, Kansas. It would be possible at some seasons of the year to fill your bill here, but not now. I can get the Indians and a small expense aside from transportation. Write me when you hear from H. Frank North. No correspondence between Hickok and Barnett has been found so far, but North's letter establishes a link between them earlier than the reported meeting at Kansas City a few months later. Barnett reached Fort McPherson late in May, from where, on June 1st, he wrote to his wife that he hoped to conduct his business and be back home in 2 days, but wished he had been better informed of progress. On June 12th, the Omaha Weekly Herald published a letter from the correspondent at Fort McPherson dated June 3rd. Quote, a novel undertaking is on foot here and is of gigantic proportions. Colonel Sidney Barnett of Niagara Falls is getting up a grand buffalo hunt at Niagara Falls from the 1st to the 4th of July. He is now here for the purpose of completing arrangements and superintending the starting of the enterprise and shipping the buffaloes east. He has secured the services of celebrated scout and hunter Mr. J.B. Omohundro, better known as Texas Jack, the hero of the Loop Fork. Texas Jack is a partner of Buffalo Bill, and nothing that skill and foresight can accomplish will be spared to make this hunt a perfect success. Through the kindness of Major North, the commander of the Pawnee Scouts, arrangements are being made for a party of Pawnee Indians, the deadly and bitter enemies of the Sioux, to go to Niagara with their fleet ponies and lodges and full war and hunting equipment. The buffalo will pass through Omaha the latter part of this or early part of next month. We think this is a grand affair and believe there can be no question of success from the reputation of the parties engaged in it. The spectacle that will present itself to the scores of thousands who will be spectators at Niagara will be the most novel and thrilling ever seen east of the Great Plains, and will give our eastern friends an idea of what buffalo hunting is in Nebraska." End quote. This was followed up on July 2nd by the Lincoln Daily State Journal with a report from its correspondent, W.D. Wildman, who described Texas Jack's attempts to capture the buffalo alive. They wrote, quote, "I will relate an incident heretofore unheard of in buffalo hunting. A gentleman from Saratoga, New York, came to Fort McPherson and hired 3 of the Western scouts to capture 8 fully grown buffalo to astonish the town of Saratoga on the 4th of July and a grand celebration on that day. And I understand a party of Pawnee Indians were to be taken along to shew the uninitiated how low Indians could do the buffalo on a hunt. 3 gentlemen well known to Western men for daring were chosen as its leaders: Dashing Charlie, Texas Jack, and a man by the name of Barrett. His initials I did not know, as my informant did not know them. They started from Red Willow early Sunday morning, 9th of June, crossed the Republican, and proceeded to Beaver Creek, 15 miles away. And before noon, the 8 bulls were prisoners and loaded onto wagons. The mode of capture was as follows. One would throw a lasso over the animal's neck and follow with a slack rope until another could lasso the foot. Then they proceeded to down the beast. Once down, he was quickly tied and ready for loading onto the wagons. And so the fun went on with one variation. After Texas Jack had lassoed an uncommonly large, ugly old bull, and before anyone could secure his leg, he turned short and charged, caught the horse, and pitched both into a gully. Here the grit and action of a true Western hunter came apparent. His well-trained horse waited for its rider, and my informant stated that the rope was not even dropped, but man and horse were together again following the buffalo until he was finally captured. To read such things is all very well, but to do them is quite a different thing. For my part, I believe rather than be one to capture one of those fellows, I had rather go through the Battle of Chickamauga again." End quote. Texas Jack, in his capacity as trail agent for the Pawnees, wrote to Jacob M. Troth, the Pawnee Indian agent at Genoa, requesting that he be allowed to take some of the Indians to Niagara Falls to appear in Barnett's hunt. Troth contacted his own superior, Barclay White, superintendent of Indian Affairs stationed at Omaha. On June 13th, Troth advised Texas Jack, quote, "Your letter was received, and I have had an interview with the superintendent on the subject, and we unite in our view in reference to our Indians going off on an expedition of the kind you propose. It is also prohibited by the department." End quote. Barnett, meantime, was growing impatient with bureaucratic delays. On June 20th, he telegraphed F.A. Walker, the commissioner on Indian Affairs in Washington, writing, "I made arrangements with Major North of Columbus, Nebraska for 5 Pawnee Indians to come here for a buffalo hunt expedition 1st July. Their tickets were bought and great expense incurred by advertisements. The agent on reserve now refused to let them come. Will you direct that they be allowed to come? Can refer you to any person here. Will be most serious loss to me and disappoint thousands of Indians if not allowed to come. Sidney Barnett." On the 21st, Barnett sent another telegram to the commissioner. "I have incurred expenditure of $5,000. This disappointment will utterly ruin me. Can refer you as to my character to Colonel Parker, to Mr. Chilton, or any person at Niagara will give any amount of security. Please reconsider. Sidney Barnett. Please answer quickly." Commissioner Walker's response was brief and to the point. Quote, "Matter cannot be reconsidered." End quote. Barnett was furious. But he now had another problem. Once his Pawnees had been refused permission to travel to Canada, Texas Jack backed out, and Buffalo Bill was otherwise engaged with his scouting duties for the 5th Cavalry. Worse, many of the buffalo that had been captured had died, as so many of them did in captivity. Agent Barnett wrote to Major North, who was back at Fort D.A. Russell, and who replied on July 2nd, 1872. "My dear Mr. Barnett, your letter of June 28th is received, and I must, feeling as I do, answer at once. I heartily sympathize with you, and were it in my power, I should offer help and amends in some way, but I see nothing I could do to help this lost cause. There was one blunder made in regard to the Indians, and that was by Matthews, yet he was perfectly innocent in the matter. When I left Columbus, I was very poorly, not hardly able to get around, and my instructions to Matthews were limited. But on my arrival here, I immediately wrote him and told him to take my team and go at once to the reserve and select his men and get the agent's permission for them to go. But he thought, as you and I do, that the trip would be beneficial and that the agent would have no objections to their going, as they are roaming around the country all the time, and some of them he has not seen for 1 year that I know of. I can find Pawnees in Omaha that will testify that they have not been on the reserve for 6 months and perhaps a year. The sticking point is this: the Quaker agent wants to show his authority and make out that their policy is the only safe one with Indians, and so help me God, as long as I have known those Indians, I never knew so corrupt a set of officers over them as now. I think their race is nearly run. If Greeley is elected, I know it is. Anything I can do for you, command, and I will obey. With great respect, Frank North. P.S. What have I wrote is between you and me, as I am in the service. I wish this kept. Major North's reference to Matthews offers a possible explanation for what had led to the official intervention of the Commissioner for Indian Affairs. Matthews was Lieutenant Fred Matthews, a Canadian and former stagecoach driver who served with the Pawnee Scouts and later joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West, where his skill with a six in hand was put to use on the Deadwood stage. Matthews, as an act of courtesy, took it upon himself to inform the Indian agent of their intent, in the belief that there would be no objection. Clearly, North was annoyed with the agent, but because of his official status, he had to divorce himself from the situation. During Barnett's exchanges with Commissioner Walker, A. Porter of the legal firm Griffith and Porter at Niagara Falls, New York, also wrote on Barnett's behalf to Walker. In his letter of July 3rd, Porter asked if there was some way, quote, existing laws and treaty regulations, end quote, could resolve the matter, since Barnett had incurred a great deal of expense and would provide whatever security was necessary. On July 18th, Barnett himself wrote directly to President Grant's secretary, General Horace Porter, outlining the efforts and expense involved and the part played by Major North and Captain Matthews. He said he was unaware of any U.S. laws that prevented the Indians from visiting civilized countries. Such travel would be beneficial. President Grant agreed that the Indians should be allowed to go, but the Office of Indian Affairs thought otherwise. With no hope of producing a hunt for the 4th of July celebrations, Bennett determined on a later date. It was reported that one of his agents had reached Wichita, where the Weekly Eagle of August 9, 1872 noted, quote, one of the parties connected with the promised big buffalo hunt at Niagara Falls was in Wichita last week, hiring Mexican greasers and buying Indian ponies and Texas cattle for the great sell, end quote. Barnett had probably given up any hope of procuring buffalo or Indians from within the United States, but an obscure account published in 1895 claimed that he, quote, went to the Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma, where he engaged some Sac and Fox Indians and Mexican cowboys and secured a fresh lot of buffaloes for his show. It was in Kansas City that he met Bill Hickok, one of the most daring and dashing scouts in the West, and he engaged him to go east and manage the Niagara Falls buffalo hunt, end quote. By the summer of 1872, Hickok was a living legend thanks to his real exploits and to such publications as Harper's New Monthly Magazine. His reputation had been further enhanced when, for 8 months, from April to December of 1871, he served as the marshal or chief of police in Abilene, the premier cow town in Kansas. In Abilene, he was involved in only one gunfight. It was on October 5th when, in the glare of kerosene lamps outside a saloon, he confronted a drunken mob of about 50 armed Texans. One of them fired at him, but missed. Hickok fired back, hitting him twice in the stomach, and he died 3 days later. Another man brandishing a pistol ran into the line of fire and was also shot by Hickok, who did not recognize him in the glare. It was his friend, Mike Williams, the former city jailer. It was generally agreed that the shooting was a tragic accident. Hickok had Williams's body shipped back to his family at Kansas City, paid for the funeral, and later visited Williams's wife to explain what had happened. By mid-December, the city council decided to ban the next season's cattle drive because of the evils of the trade, leaving Hickok out of a job. But he was publicly commended for his efforts to preserve life and property in Abilene. He then moved to Kansas City, where he was living when Barnett arrived. Back at Niagara Falls, it was late in August before Barnett was ready to stage his hunt. Although he had prepared and distributed broadsides or handbills advertising the event, only one of them is known. In describing the fame of Mr. William Hickok, better known as Wild Bill, Barnett's use of William instead of James is understandable. He publicized his dispute with Washington, quote, "Notwithstanding the refusal of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs at Washington to allow the Pawnee Indians engaged by me to leave their reservation, and which caused the postponement of the hunt on the former occasion, he had now secured Indians of the best hunting band of the Sac and Fox tribes," end quote. And over 50 Indians of different tribes would appear in full war dress and take part in the hunt. On August 28th, the following advertisement appeared in the Niagara Falls, New York Gazette, quote, "This novel and most exciting affair will positively take place on the days mentioned and will be under the management and direction of Wild Bill William Hickok, the most celebrated scout and hunter of the plains. No expense has been spared to make it the most interesting, the most exciting, and the most thrilling spectacle ever witnessed east of the Missouri River," end quote. In a preview of the same issue, the paper added the following news item, quote, "The Grand Buffalo Hunt over the river opens today at 3:00 p.m. Sidney Barnett has spared neither pains nor expense to make the undertaking a perfect success, and the most novel and exciting time may confidently be expected. Seats have been prepared to accommodate 50,000 spectators. The hunt will be under the direction of the celebrated William Hickok, or Wild Bill as he's familiarly called. A number of Sacs and Fox tribes of Indians will appear in full war costume, mounted on fleet ponies brought from the plains. A Mexican vaquero troupe will also participate. Altogether, there will be over 50 Indians and mounted men taking part in the chase. The second day of the hunt will be equally interesting and exciting. Excursion trains are being run on all the principal railroads, and it is expected that a large concourse of people will witness the hunt," end quote. On September 4th, however, the Gazette carried this review of the show, quote, "The Great Buffalo Hunt over the river came off last week according to the program. The managers of the enterprise used every endeavor to make the exhibition one of interest and amusement to the spectators and to meet the expectations of all concerned. No doubt some were disappointed in not seeing a herd of wild buffaloes instead of 3. Some 3,000 people were present the first day and a large number on Friday. Wild Bill was on hand with several Indians and Mexicans accustomed to the Western Plains and exhibited what they knew about lassoing wild cattle and buffaloes. The large race course gave ample room for an exciting chase, and the whole field was traversed. The skill of these men in riding and lassoing is remarkable. A large number of Indians played a game of lacrosse, which was novel to a good many and quite exciting. In fact, the whole show was such as every person would like to see," end quote. Others did not share that view. On August 29th, the Toronto Globe was quite scathing in its comments, writing, quote, "The buffalo hunt today was a failure. The animals turned out had been caged up for some years past and did not appear to manifest any disposition to run. Wild Bill, mounted on a low-sized Mustang, careered about after a small-sized ox and finally, by the aid of some of his satellites, managed to secure a cow, which required to be goaded to desperation before it would run at all. The throwing of the lasso was a mere sham, inasmuch as many of the Indian chiefs had de facto to take the bull by the horns to make him run. The chase after the Texan cattle was also a farce, as the Indians, disguised in their traditional war paint, wandered about on ponies after a cow that had eventually been roaming about for the last 2 years in the pastures of some peaceful agriculturist in the neighborhood of the falls. The whole affair is to be repeated on Friday next, and if no better fun is to be offered to those who patronized the entertainment, the exhibition will but be poorly attended. The proceeding was somewhat enlivened by a band of the 44th Battalion, end quote. The Lincoln County, Nebraska Advertiser on September 4th also remarked, quote, "We hear that the late buffalo hunt at Niagara commenced with a sun dance by the Indians. 4 buffaloes were then chased around the park. The Indians pitched in with their arrows, some of which landed among the spectators. A number of roughs broke down the enclosure, and the buffaloes went for some of the crowd. There was a general stampede all around for a time," end quote. The writer added that the animals were then rounded up and ready for another exhibition. 60 years later, a Canadian writer further described the hunt and its outcome, writing, quote, "The performance actually took place on August 28th and 30th, 1872, in an enclosure of possibly 80 acres or more, in which the Hydro Transformer Building and the Falls View School now stand. The attendance fell far short of expectations. Many were delighted and considered the event highly satisfactory and entertaining. The program consisted of lassoing wild Texas steers by cowboys and Indians. Wild Bill, William Hickok, the famous Western scout, had charge of the ceremonies. Buffaloes were loosed and attacked by the Indians, who charged on fleet mustangs, shooting with blunt arrows and finally capturing them by lassos. There were some war dances, and the final event was an interesting, exciting, and well-contested game of lacrosse between 2 Indian tribes for the championship. The band of the 44th Regiment from St. Catharines provided the music. Stephen Peer of Lundy's Lane gave exhibitions on rope walking on ropes stretched across the street. There were spectators, however, who were disappointed, claiming the show was too tame and the animals were too disposed to be docile and inactive, and showed very little fight and spirit. Nevertheless, Mr. Barnett had spared no expense. The traveling expenses, engaging the Indians and cowboys, capturing and transporting the buffaloes and steers, constructing the high-board fences and grandstands all cost an enormous sum of money with very little prospect of corresponding returns, the result of which was a heavy financial loss to the Barnetts, and was one of the contributing causes leading to their relinquishment of the museum business at the Falls. The 2 postponements had a tendency to blight the prospects and dampen the confidence and enthusiasm of the public, end quote. The Grand Buffalo Hunt had indeed been a disaster for the Barnetts. They never recovered financially and in 1877 sold the museum. One writer had suggested that they lost $20,000 and that Sidney, who died in 1925, had been reduced to selling Bibles in South America and other demeaning tasks during his last years. The same writer blamed it all on Buffalo Bill, who, having let Barnett down, later cashed in on the idea and made himself a name and fortune worldwide. Hickok, however, proved to be more reliable. Cody may have been guilty of many things, but there is no evidence to suggest that he let Barnett down. Rather, we are faced with an undertaking that was ill-prepared, mismanaged, and suffered from bureaucratic interference. In fact, Cody himself became a victim of the bureaucrats in December of 1872. Shortly before he and Texas Jack resigned from military service and departed for Chicago to join Ned Buntline and become stage actors, at the request of the Earl of Dunraven and several others, Cody telegraphed Barclay White for permission to take 6 Pawnees on an all-expenses-paid 6-week trip east. Again, White refused, claiming that such a venture, quote, will encourage the Indians to continue or practice any of their savage customs, or of placing them under the care of any persons who will not be to them Christian examples in every respect. I have every case of application to take them from their reserves for any such purpose, given a positive refusal, and did so in the present instance, stating my reasons therefor, end quote. He added that only a positive order from his superior officer, Walker, would, quote, induce me to allow the Indians to go, end quote. That narrow-minded view was common among those involved with Indian affairs and resulted in a contempt for, quote, ignoble savages, end quote, by some, and a desire by others to encourage the Indians to keep their culture but adapt to the white man's ways. Wild Bill, however, had fared much better. His reported antics in the arena chasing buffalo or steers in his futile attempts to rope them, something he probably rarely tried on the plains, amused the audiences who may have believed it was intentional. But the hunt had introduced Hickok to a live audience, a point noted by another later writer who declared, quote, "The buffalo hunt and rodeo may not have been a happy event in the lives of the Barnett family, but it gave many a local lad his first glimpse of a real Wild West show and the chance to see that hero of the Old West, Wild Bill Hickok. Clifton and Drummondville had witnessed something that was to be the very talk of the town for many days to come, the like of which is still yet to be seen by today's generation," end quote. Curiously, having got Hickok to Niagara Falls, Barnett failed to publicize the fact, and despite rumors to the contrary, no photographs have been found of the principals involved in the Grand Buffalo Hunt. Neither have any interviews with Hickok or any mention of his arrival and departure been noted in several newspapers on either side of the falls. Instead, we have imagined recollections written years later. One writer noted that while there, Hickok wore, quote, "the picturesque sombrero of the cowboy, buckskin suit, leggings and all, carrying a pair of Derringer pistols in his pockets on the streets for emergencies," end quote. The search of the museum's surviving visitors' registers, which might have confirmed Hickok's arrival and departure dates, was fruitless. Sometime between 1872 and the present, someone had cut out Hickok's signature and others considered collectible. Despite his problems, Barnett had brought before the public a live-action spectacle and hired a living legend to host it. 10 years later, in 1882, after years of presenting Western dramas on stage, Buffalo Bill produced an Old Glory blowout at Omaha featuring live-action cowboys, Indians, and other frontier types, which in 1883 was transformed into his Wild West Rocky Mountain and Prairie exhibition. His initial partnership with Doc Carver proved to be a disaster, but he eventually achieved worldwide fame and, more than anyone else, is credited with publicizing the American West. It is doubtful that Wild Bill was aware of all of Barnett's problems. Having kept his side of the bargain and having been paid, he returned to Kansas City before moving on to Springfield, Missouri. His subsequent appearance in Cody's stage dramas beginning late in 1873 was short-lived, for despite his tremendous draw, press reports indicated that his presence rather than his acting skills boosted attendance. He hated the sham, the public attention, and living out of a suitcase. He left the company in March of 1874 and returned to the West. 2 years later, on August 2nd, 1876, he was murdered at Deadwood, Dakota Territory, as he sat playing cards in Saloon Number 10. Ironically, only 5 months before, on March 5th, he had married Agnes Lake Thatcher, herself a circus performer of some merit and fame who, unlike her husband, loved the limelight. Thank you for listening to the Nebraska History Podcast. To learn more about Nebraska History Magazine, to listen to more podcasts, or to support our podcast by becoming a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, go to history.nebraska.gov/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when we release new episodes on your favorite podcast platform every other week. Until next time, I'm Chris Goforth.